more hours of sobriety.
No.
Well, he's in charge. From one militaristic view, those on the mystical quest are like men with but one foe. And a correspondent writes, I liked it better back when I believed it was more complicated and multifaceted. Is there any way I can go back, or is it now too late for me? I don't know, sir. What time is your watch showing? And meanwhile, he wrote back saying, I don't appreciate that kind of sarcastic response to a serious question. But at least you shocked me into realizing that I do only have one foe, and it is you. Who? Me, dear sir? Yes, you, he replied. Then suddenly collapsed as both sides of his mind were overcome by the effort of carrying on this illusionary dialogue. But then suddenly appeared his dream mind, which replied, Ha! I'm not tired. I, in fact, am just now raring and ready to go. And for those lost or disoriented on this page, by this page, I'll repeat its opening. Those on the great, internal quest for personal consciousness have but one foe. Guess who?
No.
Hint for a Friday. You'll never get rid of door-to-door salesmen if you're selective in denying them entry. Today's science fiction feature. There was once a planet on which the conscious creatures referred to their minds as he who invented the word taste yet lacks any discrimination.
No.
I don't know. Maybe English wasn't their native tongue or something. And now an advance hint for a Saturday. You'll never be rid of door-to-door salesmen if you depend on the one now keeping house for you to determine who it is tastefully to let in. Who is tasteful to let in and who is not. One man decided not to take racing tips from horses in queues at 3M plants. Well, I was going to say at LePage plants, and I thought, well, does anybody remember? Oh, you do. A stomach and a brain were talking, and the stomach said, sometimes my person eats too much, and sometimes they eat too little. And the brain responded, And the stomach asked, anything similar with your person regarding your operations? And the brain almost burst a blood vessel laughing. One man apparently liked to hear himself talk, but is quick to point out that this is only because there is no one else he likes to hear. A boy asked his father, is a fair man a happy man? And was replied, you missed it again. There is no such thing as an unfair man. If you're alive, you are what you are, and what could be fairer than that? And as so often occurred in these circumstances, the lad suddenly incurred a horrendous headache, but was not too concerned since he knew from experience that it would last only until he properly digested what the old man had just said. That and the fact that he and his elder are just two sides of his own brain. A man in the woods once reached down to pick up a snake, but was uncertain and asked the snake which end was its head and which end its tail. And the snake did not bother to respond, operating on the basis that anyone so stupid as to not know one end from the other deserved whatever might befall them. You figure that snake had run across humans before? A man got local conditions on the phone and said, say, look here, I seem to have misplaced Life's private number. Could you give it to me again? And LC replied, get out of here. I hear that one all the time. So the man said, well, maybe you can help. And conditions grunted to go ahead, and ahead the man went. Okay, what I was wondering was whether or not I am on the right track with my life. And Things Local replied by asking, are you alive? Yes, replied the man. Then you are, said Local Conditions, barely able to suppress its incongruity at man's continuing pretensions to be himself. At the end of his shift that day, local conditions reported this conversation to Life, who grasped its forehead and moaned. See, the two have this little game that they play regarding men. A boy asked his father, "Papa, how can I tell if you like someone or not?" And he replied, "If I tolerate them, I like them." And immediately muttered to his own thoughts, "Don't be assuming that necessarily applies to you guys." For many years, one man attempted to call hogs, but with little success. Then finally realized that hogs don't want to be called, unless there's something fattening in it for them. In one galaxy, they have an annual stupid showdown. And year after year, the winner turns out to be someone who thinks. "I don't get it," said one porker. "I know," said another. "I told you we should have been cows." But upon considering this, the first one had little faith that such a change would have made substantial difference. Someone asked a man standing on the corner, "Is that an awakened snake in your pocket, or are you just Aesop trying to hitch a ride?" Muscles need heroes, hence sports. And you'd think minds do also, hence nothing. And for those of you telecoursing this program, I should note that the just read item was one of those which is both, that is to say, all three things. It is true, it is not true, and if it is either of these two, then it is ridiculous. According to one legend, man's initial concept of a supernatural realm involved the idea of one God, a good guy, and a multitude of bad demon guys. But then as time passed and man passed gas, he began to tighten up this scenario and got it down to where there was still just one God, but then only a dozen or so opposing bad guys. And sometime after that, he refined it even further to the point where he pictured only one God with only one anti-God giving him grief. Legend then goes on to say that when this place is reached, men abandon any further advancement in this area. And for you true folklorists, this particular legend has a secret second ending in which it rudely sticks out its tongue at humans. One tale tells of life directing local conditions, and one reality to keep the creatures in the front lines of the parade talking so as to keep those in the rear following. Serious saga lovers note, each man is his own parade, but only the awakened are aware of it. One man complained that he did not like the constant, uncontrollable changes in temperature, and someone asked him where he lived. "Planet Mind," he replied, and all within hearing nodded knowingly. In physical, civilized lands, suicide is always forbidden. The reason being, so as to distract people's attention away from the other type possible. A viewer writes, "Is it really true that life has to arrange things specifically to keep man from seeing what's going on and from then trying to struggle against it? Level with me. Is that really true?" No, sir, you guessed it. It is not like that. But to say that it is the only way to open the subject to any further verbal exploration. And now yet another partial explanation for everything. Ordinary men attribute the cause of everything to circumstances. Men invented circumstances. You take it from there. And those of you who keep asking, I would give the full explanation for everything instead of all these partials, except that you've yet to fully digest them. One man wants us to hear his latest theory. He says he now believes that when his body's pissed, his mind is also. Now another man wants us to hear his latest poem. The value of theories go up, the value of theories go down. Theories can scam the scammer and allow an ignorant man to believe he's otherwise. And now a final man sends us his latest thought. He says that most of these men we quote are idiots, including him, and wonders why we don't label them as such up front. And after this short break, we'll be back with what I trust now will be some news of a more familiar and normal sort. Our sponsors remind you to buy something. Now back to the news and stuff. Life gives to man, as we find him in this part of the universe, an unstated choice of being either conscious and not particularly caring that he is, or else being so and really caught up in the whole affair. And it's not hard to guess which one you are, is it? And of your rights, dear sir, I for one am sick of guessing. If this is the best you have to offer, I say that you should go off the air, cancel your show, shut the hell up and be done with it. I do hope this does not seem too rude or pushy, but I have been ill lately. Yours, a man assumed conscious but not particularly concerned one way or the other. SASE, enclosed, etc. Human biographies, a brief poem, and a short question. I wish it was me, being he. But now ask yourself, you're alive too, and what good did it do? How to look at it if you want to, or even need to. If you're not successful, you can always say that you are ahead of your time, or behind your time, or anything along these lines will work. People in the back of the parade can't see those in front. Simple people can't see those more complex. People in penthouses can't see those in the basement, and I would add that those less conscious can't see those who are more so, except that there aren't enough who are more conscious to make it worth the effort. And of your rights. Why is it just about the time I think you're going to end one of your little stories or so-called news items on a positive note, you suddenly will turn it around and make me feel like a piece of crap? About an hour after receiving this, someone delivered a telegram from the same man which said, "It just struck me, the possibility that my feeling out crap at the conclusion of your comments might not be entirely your responsibility. If this becomes even clearer to me before dark, I'll send you another wire saying that it's probably not even partially your fault." Guy said, "Man's intellectual life is so boring and unimaginative that I can hardly stand it." And someone asked if he had anything particular in mind as an example, and he replied, "Well, my own, of course." Man says, what everybody else calls consciousness, I call a mess. A man writes, "What you speak of regarding controlling attention, I find in practice to be like chasing a cheetah in a lard factory." A tip for when you're home alone. Most door-to-door salesmen gain entry to people's homes by getting those inside to take them seriously. But, come to consider it correctly, if you're already home alone, all by your little mental lonesome, you don't need such a tip. One man's motto is, whoever's there, I'm not interested. But not an attitude to warm the heart of local conditions charged with the responsibility of keeping man's neural fires stoked. A mother called out to her son who was upstairs alone in his room with the door shut, "Young man, you better be physically playing with yourself and not that other thing I've warned you about." Near the outskirts of reality, life once built a city and gave the inhabitants and their families a choice of living in upper stories or on lower floors. But being so busy with overseeing these assignments, it didn't notice that a few men slipped onto the roof of the building and began constructing their own private additions, just large enough for one, themselves, their own individual awareness. How to be mentally ill or at least disturbed to the degree you wish, without the effort or expense of professional assistance. Here it is. All you need to do is decide that you are. But before all of you are at me, no, there is not something comparable regarding the effort to be more consciously stable. Well, yeah, sure there is, but we've already talked about it so much that I'm ashamed to bring it back up in public. So take what you've got and run with it. Someone asked a man staying on the corner, "Are you the father of modern psychology, or am I mistaken in some time attention is just attention?" There is a myth which says life told Earth's very first man that he could either believe in it or give it a name. All right, I got a myth for you. Life told man he could either understand it or give it a name. Pardon me, I hear someone at the door. No. One man began to think of his time spent in bed at night as an adjunct to the adjustment to adhesiveness. And then there was this other guy who says, "If death is at all like sleep, then count me out." One man swallowed a ladder, then the ladder swallowed him. Then he became confused in telling up from down. Clues as to when talk is reaching its limits. The first one is when metaphors are no longer necessary. The second is when the literal becomes superfluous. Someone asked a man staying on the corner, "Are you enlightened or just waiting on a bus?" For a while, one man felt superior because he only plagiarized himself. Eventually, he stopped feeling that way. Tonight's mental beauty tip. If you believe in the existence of ugliness, you're a dead man. I beg your pardon, injects a voice, but what in the world does ugliness have to do with someone dying? Hey, you're not listening. I said it was a mental beauty tip. An epic in a distant star cluster tells of a creature who was standing on the corner when life came by, stopped and said to him, "What would you say to me offering you the illusion of a wide range of preferences?" And the creature replied, "Did the crosstown bus run all night long?" "Doo-dah, replied life, right on cue. "Is that ugly enough for you?" The reason that so many children and other humans hate math is because the idea of 2 + 2 being 4 is so serious. Proverb update. Those whom the gods would destroy, they say to them, "Want a job?" In a solar system far, far away was once a world in which reality was held together not by magnetism, which is the norm, but by baling wire. That is, until a few creatures there realized that it was their minds being so held together. Someone asked a man staying on the corner, "Do I take it from the look on your face that you have yet to awaken, or that you have swallowed something that doesn't agree with you?" "Yes," replied the man, "me." One man's posted rules. You can fool life, you can fool others. You can fool your boss, you can fool your mother. But the one person you cannot fool is yourself. That is, unless you're still alive when you read this. Okay, he said to his listeners, here's the deal. Glue doesn't have to be attractive, logical, useful, or serious in intent. And someone raised a hand and asked, "What do you think of my hand?" "Okay," he replied, looking directly at the questionnaire, "here's the deal. You graduated, you're out of here." Should I have read it slower? Tonight's nutritional news. You'll never lose weight if you care what you eat. And finally, tonight's advanced swallowing story. One man quit swallowing. For those of you within the sight of my voice, who for whatever reason are not discouraged enough or find life upsetting enough, I have two pieces of info. One is man's thought processes and his so-called emotions are part of what is a heretofore undiagnosed strain of virus. The other piece of news is that those of you interested in activities such as this, you are taking seriously something that everyone else on this planet finds totally unimportant. And at least you think that those two pieces of information are not related, then at least there's one piece of good news: you're correct. There is a total dynamic at work that men's minds never notice regarding what they call the activity of their minds. And it is the uncharted reality behind all of the news items I bring up regarding originality, the lack thereof, and plagiarism, and cannibalism. It is not only unseen, but if you can see the quite simple basis for it, the root of it, then you'll understand why it's not seen. And all creatures on this planet, and all of life, but to bring it to a apparent vital level, I assume that everyone can see without any great metaphysical or any great scientific effort that there is what is normally referred to as some sort of food chain. It is actually more than that, because the food chain always implies, operating from a normal mental position, that it runs in sequence, that it runs directionally, that big sharks eat little sharks and little sharks eat squids and etc. It is really an omnidirectional chain. It is simply a net by which everything is connected. At a quite physical level, there is a connection between, let's make it simple and just use all sentient creatures, between all, and specifically, if it helps, all pack animals, those that hang out together, but it's true for everything. On a much broader level, it's not only true between pack animals, it's true between non-pack animals and trees. But try to be fairly reasonable. Pardon me. Take it on the basis of herd and pack animals. There is just all sorts of information. There, in fact, continues to be spooky, all the way from spooky to scientific musings over the fact that there seems to be even a kind of communication that can go on between animals that is damn near supernatural from the scientific view. It is this, amongst animals, let's take the pack animals I said, but it certainly does not stop there, it doesn't start there, and it's not limited to that. But there is a communication, and I do not mean in any supernatural weird sense, but there is a communication between all pack animals, all herd animals. And it's observed by ordinary people. They do not necessarily make anything great out of it, but it is there. There is also a communication, and I'm using communication in the widest possible sense. That is a connection. There is a connection between humans at a physical level, just as strong. It is the basis for the speculations and notions that people suddenly wake up in the middle of the night and know that their mother died 2,000 miles away. Regardless, of any validity or lack thereof of any particular example of someone saying that. And you might notice no one ever says that until after they know that their mother has died. That is still not taking away from it, but it's just, people know that something is going on. It is not spooky communication, it's not aspects of the spirit world. It is simply the fact that one fish in the water, when it moves to some degree, a fish a long way off will experience the ramifications of his little tail wag. To say that fish in the water communicate non-verbally, non-intellectually, is not to say the obvious, it's to say something there's really no term for. To say that fish in the water communicate non-verbally, all right, I'll give it a shot. It's to say that they can't help it. It's not speculation, or shouldn't be to anyone who understands anything. It's not any sort of inquiry, such as, well, that's weird. It's not weird. Or shouldn't be speculation about, well, in that one case, I believe that little carp had some kind of supernatural communication to that grouper over there. It's not supernatural, and it's not speculation, and it's not an anomaly. If there was not communication going on, that would be the anomaly. The communication is simply that there is an omnidirectional, there's a net. Instead of the food chain, there's a net going in all possible directions. I've gone to the trouble in times past to draw, I won't go the effort, but I just start drawing dots and say that's humans. And between all dots, start drawing lines, and even on a two-dimensional surface. Not even on a two-dimensional surface, it does not begin to cover it, because it would have to be a three-dimensional model that there is between you and everything else in life what amounts to an invisible line of communication. And I do not mean communication limited to any ordinary definition of communication. It is simply the general flow of life. It is the vital energy of life itself running through everything. You can't escape it. There's nowhere to go. On that basis, though, that being a physical, nonverbal, all-encompassing form of communication or a form of connection, and as I said, not only between pack animals, but between animals and mountains, between trees and humans. It's just the further you get outside your species, you'd be hard-pressed. I don't want anyone. I know there's been books that men made money saying that they talk to their houseplants. I do not try to encourage anyone. We got better things to do, unless you're so conscious I can't conceive of it. But there's better things to do than you try to find the communication between you and trees. It is there. But first off, you should be worried about the real one. Your concern would be your communication with yourself. Your communication with life. It just is, the closer you are to your species. In other words, from a tree's view, it's unimportant, but if we could have the kind of experiential existence of a tree, or tree consciousness, if you will, if we were a tree and we were talking, you would realize that communication between you and a tree on the other side of the world was closer to you than communication between you and some man staying there. It's simply a matter of it being, let us say, on the similar species or the same species. But at any rate, humans are in constant connection. They have no choice at a physical level. And by physical, I just mean the survival level at which all creatures on this planet are connected. From that grows, in the same way that from the body and survival instinct grows emotions and grows the mind, from that arises human thought and emotions. Man is likewise, I'm just going ahead and assume that you can see the validity, that there is a unquestionable genuineness to the fact that there is a communication between humans. I know for a random audience that is a stretch for me to say I assume that, but it's just obvious as hell. Anyone should be able to feel the reality of that, at least on small, specific examples, such as I said, of people feeling that they have some connection with their blood kin, or that every now and then they have premonitions. It's really child's play, and it's not always properly named. But that is the basis of where the idea came from, because it is real. And it's real in other ways, now that, in case you don't see it, such as you walking down the street, out in public, you know to stay certain distances from people, certain people. And you don't analyze. You can be walking down a crowded street and there's certain people and you never think about it. If you had to think about it, it would be too late. But you recognize that there's certain people you can get closer to when bodies are jammed into a confined space. And there are other people that you should not get so close to. And your body can analyze, can compute all of this, that you're there in the middle of downtown Manhattan at 8:45 in the morning and walking along, and it's people almost, you look at it and they appear to be shoulder to shoulder. That it's almost that they're in some sort of unspecified ranks and files. But if you actually looked, or if you feel it yourself, you don't have to look, you should be aware of what I'm saying. You walk along in such condition, and you're apparently always just almost touching everybody in front, backing on all the sides. And yet there are variations. You and other people are continuing going through a nonverbal, a physical choreography, that there are certain people, and you don't even have to look. This is the communication I'm talking about. There are people that you know not to get so close to. And literally, they may just be at the edge of your peripheral vision. You just know it. Sometimes behind you, you know that there's somebody that you won't get away from. You can just feel it. It is not supernatural at all. It is there. That is the general flow physically in which everything exists. And men specifically exist in it. And it is this continuing communication, is this pulling and pushing and closer from one person to another. And it is varying constantly. From that, not just from that, but of course from the body itself arises man's nervous system extending into a brain. Man becomes so-called conscious, and with consciousness it mixes with survival instincts and produces a offshoot that men call their emotions. The emotions, the so-called emotions, and man's so-called, mental life are likewise subject to this continual communication. No one looks at it this way, and you know damn well that few people would ever think about what I just said about the kind of communication going on vis-a-vis my example of saying walking down a crowded street. Surely between that and people believing that they can feel things going on with their blood kin, their mother, their twin brother, their sister, and some distance. But somewhere in there, I assume that you do realize, at least that or animals. Anyway, it should be obvious. If it's not, there's nothing I can prove to you. There's nothing I care to go into. That is a constant. It is not a theory. It is not a sometimes thing. It is a constant. You can't get away from it even if you wanted to. It's just a matter of whether you realize it or not. It is going on. It is life being alive. So let's assume that you can get some grasp, that you have some notion that yes, that is very likely true to some degree. That yes, I hear it. I feel what you're saying. But notice, people never take that into account. Now here, well, very seldom. Let's do that so I can make a comparison. Very seldom do very few people ever even think about that. That's physically. When you get into the mind, when you get into the thoughts and emotions, it now becomes a matter that people never do. Never, 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 never. But it is from this that if you can open up your ears objectively and keep out your critical remarks and keep out your own mind's participation, you do realize, it's not that hard at all, that you realize that me taking shots sometimes at cliches is like shooting elephants in a shoebox. I don't know how they got there, but it takes that kind of dunderheaded, myopic sharpshooterness, and plus having nothing better to do for someone to attack cliched thinking or speech. Because if you listen, that is all that goes on. That is all that goes on in the intellectual realm of man. Mental realm, at least you get the wrong idea about intellectual. The verbal realm of man, which is just a audible offshoot of his mental life, is nothing but cliches. It is nothing but that. It is nothing but, and by cliches, again, I mean the widest possible sense. It's these ones are the actual cliches that you can listen to a public figure, one of our leaders. You can listen to a news commentator. You can listen to someone seeking public office. And we're talking about educated, sophisticated people. And they can run together. They can speak for 2 minutes. And if you listen, taking out the prepositions and the well, that's about it, isn't it? Taking out the prepositions. They can speak, and what it will pass, if you don't pay any attention, will pass for insightful commentary on something going on, and it will be 4 or 5, 3 or 4 word cliches strung together. And in fact, as I've tried to point out to you, it's not an attack. It passes. They feel it if somebody pointed it out. When they say it or when they read it, if say it was a newsman and somebody wrote his copy, or whether he did, but even if somebody wrote it for him, and if you stopped him and said, well, you realize that's not, you got 5 cliches there and they're just strung together, there is a feeling inside the human nervous system, is getting close to what I've been telling you about, is a kind of mental passion that, and it's hip. That it's like, well, only somebody up to date and hip would know those 5 cliches. No. The average guy, the average Joe wouldn't even know those 5. So we're probably pushing the limit now to our viewers' intelligence. But God, that's hip. That those 5, all the way from that to, I said, another one that goes on constantly, that people do it in public forums of someone asking someone a question. Well, would you say that if we cut the deficit this way, it's going to have a positive effect on the economy? And he said, well, it'll definitely have a positive effect on the economy. They went to the trouble to find an expert to repeat the question of this high school graduate with a mic in his hand. Dear sir, would you say that that's what's going to cause what has brought this on? Oh, that's definitely what's brought it on. Well, thank you so much for your expert view. It's not a joke. It goes on and people do not even notice it. And even if they did, they would not care. Even if they did, according to what their sarcastic quotient was of themselves, they would either go, ha, you're right, and think it was an attack, or else they would fail to see, what's the importance of it. The man communicated what he wanted to. The man didn't communicate anything. He showed up to be interviewed. He is an expert. He gave them these little quick bios so that they could say, and we have with us today to comment on this proposed change in the economy, Dr. So-and-so, head of economics department, such University. Hello, doctor. Would you say that the way, by them cutting the prime rate today, that the economy will probably heat up? And he'll say, there is no doubt it will heat up. Well, thank you, doctor. And you feel, I say you feel, the way things work, no one analyzes it, but if you are interested in such matters, you may feel, you may think as though something occurred. It was not just a reporter. They tracked down, they invited the head of the economics department from such university, and you heard him say it. The man repeated the question. That is the nature of the intellectual life of man. And what I'm describing now, at least you lost the point, at any given time, and it's continually shifting the same way that one individual walking down streets of Manhattan at 8:45 on a work day, that there is this constant shifting of people jockeying around and trying not to get too close to certain people and so other people they can get. It's this continuing. It's fish in the water. If you want to know it, as you look up, and there are thousands of birds flying in formation. And as far as we can tell, there is no drum major. No one is calling out directions. And those sons of guns flying around like this as fast as they can go, and suddenly they go bzz, 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 bzz. Never. There is not one record of there ever being a fender bender among birds in a flock. There it is. I mean, you can look and see. There it is. There is man physically. He just doesn't think about it. Now, there is man intellectually and emotionally. And he damn sure never thinks about it. So even if you saw, it's just a build-up, even if you begin to see and begin to listen, and you heard that the intellectual life of man, the so-called intellectual life of man, is reflected, it's easiest to see or quickest to see on the verbal level, but you can read. You know, if you want to do it slower in the privacy of your own home, you can read it, and there it is. The words on paper are audibly out in the air, floating from tongue to ear, are birds flying, and they go this way and they go that way. And even if you do not hear cliches, even if you do not hear someone saying, yes, it will heat up the economy. There is nothing going on that is not part of a network, and it is in flux constantly. That's why cliches fall out of favor, come back to favor, and not just cliches, why there's certain areas that are of interest. You know, nowadays it's considered the so-called age of information, and news is considered to be very important. In other words, it is now one of the average person's major hobbies in life next to sports is keeping up with the news. And there's no such thing as the news out there. People say there is, and there apparently is to the ordinary mind, but no one ever questions the fact that for a while, the bloodshed in a certain country will be on the news constantly, making the headlines in the paper. And it goes on, God knows how long. Who decides? Nobody knows. But it is the opening story constantly for X number of days, weeks, even months. And then suddenly, the birds change, and you don't hear about it. And I don't know what you ever thought about it, but the hostilities, that which they thought they were reporting on, are still going on. Not one bit of change. Because that was not the news anyway. The fighting is something. If there is actual fighting going on somewhere, that is one thing. The reporting on it has nothing to do with it. The reporting on it is now in the mind of man. In the mind of man, there is no originality. There is nowhere to step in and say, well, wait a minute, let's say this. You have to be cannibalizing at the routine level. You are cannibalizing, you are plagiarizing, you are responding to questions by repeating the question. Yes it is. It is a kind of continual, I don't want to be crude, but it is a kind of continual regurgitation, is a kind of cannibalism. And by now, surely, some of you feel that. It becomes extremely weary. And once you get weary of that, by the way, you're in for real bad news. Because once you get weary of that, not just hostile, not critical, not answering, you just weary, and the weariness I speak of, we shouldn't put in quotation marks, it is the recognition of what I'm saying. That there is, the world of man, intellectually, and I was going to get to emotionally whether I do or not, but you can figure it out for yourself, that intellectually, there is literally nothing new, original, going on. Ordinary people, notice, do not mind. They will subscribe to the paper. They will subscribe, pay nice bucks for subscriptions to 2 or 3 news magazines. They will pay for, or watch television news, read books, and not be aware of the fact, not be bothered by the fact, but they're not aware of it and they're not bothered by it, that they have not read anything new, they have not thought anything new, they have not heard anything new, since the first 2 or 3 days after they became intellectually alive. That's true for everyone. And no one notices it. No one cares. The mind receives the nourishment that it needs through that process. Now the second bad news, that was covering the first bad news I opened up with. The second bad news is that people involved, people who are interested in such as this, are taking something seriously. And now let's define, just for the time being, for this conversation, what it is I mean that are taking something seriously. And that is the possibility of men intellectually having some insight into life. Of men being, which is synonymous in a real sense with being individually, mentally original. Which makes no sense to the ordinary mind. I mean, it could attempt to make sense out of it and attempt to define it or say, oh yeah, I know what you mean by that, and it doesn't. Because it can't be original. But the second piece of bad news was that when I said that people involved or interested in such as this are attempting to do something which no one else takes seriously, which no one else has any interest in. And that is being able to use the mind in a different way. Let me turn it back to where we were, see if we can make a little more sense. My full tirade last show, and I was talking about everybody's idiots and fools, and everybody knows they are. It is, from one view, it is a simple observation. It does not take, by any means, taking a course in any college, university, or night school. And at another extreme, it does not require any time spent in a mystical monastery somewhere, studying at the feet of some transcendental guru. I don't know what else to say except if you can use the mind in any way approaching its potential, then you can hear what I'm pointing out, that there is running through, it's like a line connecting everyone's brain, not their pelvis, not their body, but another one that is connecting everyone mentally in his lines of communication. And as soon as you are conscious, I was stretching it saying within a few days or a few hours, but as soon as you're conscious, you are plugged into this system. It is a worldwide intellectual net. And whatever life sends into that, it goes through everybody. And it is not the same all over the planet, is obvious. And it's not even the same with some little group. It is in constant flux, like a crowd of people walking down a busy street. It comes and it goes, and what's going on specifically within the network is irrelevant. It is only to those tied to it whose only access, whose only thinking process is limited to that net. It is only they who take it seriously, which includes everybody. When I say they, it includes you if you're there, because you suddenly hear, well, the president said so-and-so, or the Pope said so-and-so, or so-and-so, whatever it was, whatever interests you and catch your attention, that somebody went, rah, 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 rah. And it's like somebody pulled on your little wire here, and you go, huh. And either you agree, or you go, oh, that's good, or you go, wait a minute, and you feel like you resist it. One of the world's great illusion, because of it's like you felt that someone pulled and said, well, what we're going to do is have to raise taxes. Let's do it that way. And let's say that your mind is a fervent fiscal conservative in matters political and economic, and as soon as you hear this news, these words, you got this little bitty radio that came free with your subscription to a magazine, and you got plugged in your ear, and you're walking along, and these sound waves go into your ear, and it comes out about proposed tax increase. It gets up into your brain, those sound waves, and your brain goes, ah. And it feels as though you're tugging against this little free radio, this little thing in your ear. Now, of course, we can say, well, that's not what you're doing. You're actually, when you went, and you could have done it physically. People do. When they hear news they don't like, you know that. People go, huh? And they physically like pull away. Something they disagree with, and huh? So you say, well, that's foolish. You're not actually pulling your head away from that plug. Yeah, you are. And you can say, yeah, but there's more. Yeah, you're right. You're pulling away from that little noise coming out of the plug. Ah, yeah, but there's more than that. Okay, you're pulling away from the man in the studio who recorded that 2 hours ago. He died since then. He was in a car wreck. So you're reacting to a sound wave to a dead man. Ah, come on, you're being silly. It's more than that. Because he was repeating what the Secretary of the Treasury proposed 4 hours before he recorded it. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Yeah, well. You're reacting to things mental. It seems real enough that you say, well, it will. Eventually, it'll take money out of my pocket if this goes through. That's not what's going on. There you stand, or there you are walking down the street, or in the middle of your jog, listen to this, about proposed tax increase, and you trip and almost hurt yourself. Over what? May I be so bold as to say nothing? Nothing. Oh, yeah, but it could be something. Well, won't you wait and trip when it becomes something? I don't know. You're playing with my mind. I got news for, well, I'll be insulting. That's what people end up thinking. Well, wait a minute. When they've got nothing else to say, they go, well, wait a minute. You're just playing with words or playing with my mind. If they're a bit more intelligent, they'll say playing with my mind. Yeah. Flatter yourself. Well, Cut that off the tape. At any rate, I'm go ahead and assume for the end of the tape here that you have some notion of what I'm saying. That at the ordinary level, and I can go on and I can gesture this way and I can even reverse it for those of you of a gauche inclination and go, I can continue to talk about it. And you either by now have to feel that there is, and when I went along with that, or back to the right-hand view, that was saying, I was going to say, you don't really have to look out there at other people. All you got to do is look in your own mind. And you know that the ordinary level, to say that your mind, if you know anything about you, to say that your mind is a hotbed, a warm bed, a bed of any kind of originality, then I don't know why you're listening to me. Because there's no danger of you upsetting yourself mentally any more than you are now. No danger whatsoever. But you should know, you should just know the reality that your mind, left to its own devices, I know it's a shock. I mean, it comes as somewhat of a disappointment to many people to find themselves at the age of 35, 40, 50 degrees, many books read, and it's just like a gradual process, a gradual realization. They keep trying to look at it, and suddenly it sort of all comes together one day. And you realize that if I took everything my mind had thought, everything, in reaction to what it read, everything that's gone through my mind for the last 40 years, whatever age you are, you would be willing to wager. It's really not even worthwhile to try to do it literally, but you would have no doubt, you would accept the fact, if I said, or if you say it yourself, that you could probably take everything that you thought for the last 40 years, literally, and it would probably condense, I hate to make you feel bad, but screw you, probably less than a paragraph. And it could be less than that, folks, I don't know. But probably, I'm talking about 4 or 5 sentences, everything your mind has ever thought. You either sense that may be true and you can nervously laugh, which I don't blame you to begin with. But that's a fact, if you can see that. So, if you realize that, then you also realize that at the ordinary level, and it has nothing to do with individual people, but men have no interest in any alternative use of the mind. And the proof simply being the reality of it, that people accept it. People who then, the second piece of bad news, that are interested in such as this, taking away all even mystical sort of connotations or transcendental patinas away from it and just say that it is a mental activity, which it is, or that's what it works on, then you could say at a very routine level, or using routine, mundane terms, that people interested in the Enlightenment, awakening, the Great Liberation, and all that mystical stuff, that what they're really interested in is an alternative use of the mind. Put it to you another way. Ordinary people, ordinary, sane, everyday people, if asked, or if they think about it, will all say that they are interested in being more intelligent. If you ask, would you like to be smarter? Whatever you term, they go, yes. Would you like to know more? Oh, yes. Would you like to understand more about why you act? Would you just like to be more intelligent? Everybody would say, well, yes. And it's not true. Because education has nothing to do with it. Not once you realize that your mind has thought the same 4 or 5 lines for 40 years. For ordinary people, though, they will say, yes, I do want to be more intelligent. They will insist on it. They will show proof. Well, hey, look at the receipts here. Look at the books I buy. Look at the speeches. Look where I've gone to school. They say it. But if they cared to, as many of you know, by your own observation, by sit at home nude in the closet and just observe yourself, and you know that such a claim is fallacious. as witnessed by your behavior, as witnessed by the life you've led. You can say all you want to. Yes, I want to be more intelligent. I am not satisfied with what I know, and it is a demonstrative lie. It's an illusion. People are quite satisfied with how their mind works. They're quite satisfied with what they've thought. That's one of the benefits of this fragmented thinking that matches the kind of pulsations of the firing in the brain, or put it to you another way, that's one of the many benefits of a bad memory, is that people are not aware of the fact that I have thought the same bloody thoughts, this small handful, for 40 bleeding years. People don't know that. Well, we've been through this. People do know that, but they just don't care. Plus, nobody usually has the nerve to point it out. The bad manners to point it out. Plus, they can ignore it even when pointed out. If you think that to be civil is to be able to stand in the middle of a high-class affair with cutaway coat and all the women in evening gowns, and you suddenly hear a quite rude noise from a particular offensive body orifice, and everyone continues and do not even miss a beat. If you consider that to be a sign of gentility and good breeding and sophistication, that's nothing. You're standing mentally on a planet of 6 billion people, and what you're hearing continually, you take it as conversation, but what you're hearing continually is and everybody just goes ahead and they play like nothing happened. I want to be sure that you understand the second piece of bad news that I leave on a suitably sour and depressing note. What I want you to see is, you're attempting to do, people who are interested in this at all, I say attempting, people who are interested in this, you're interested in something that way over 99% of the world's population throughout history knows what it is, but not being able, they know that they know that their mind is not working in anything resembling an intellectual, original, personal fashion. They know that, and they do not care. And you poor people, you poor few people on this planet, you care. The rest of them gave up. The rest of them just, it's not necessary. Well, somebody's at the door. I'm going to have to cut the tape. What's game time tomorrow night? Jam.